It's not all about the US presidency, perhaps, Professor Nye, but it's certainly taking a lot of the limelight right now.
It certainly is. We have a different type of presidency in which the sideshow has become the main show.
Now, when does this end, Professor? Or does it end? Does policy, get made for the rest of the first term, or is it really all about the 6 months, the first 6 months, as is quoted in that book, Fire and Fury, quite frequently?
Well, what you find is that in the first 6 months, there was a fair degree of chaos. President Trump was new to government. His staff was new, and as we now know, was involved in a lot of internal backbiting and fighting. But I think you could argue that a number of things got sorted out when you had General Kelly as the chief of staff, and you also have General Mattis as the Secretary of Defense, General McMaster in the national security post. These are people who are used to discipline. It's interesting that you're getting a civilian regime that is run by people who learned from discipline in the military.
Professor, I want to ask you about neoliberalism. Is it in terminal crisis, or is it just experiencing an evolution right now?
Well, I think the question of the liberal international order, which was created by Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower and others 70 years ago, that was called into question by Donald Trump in the campaign. It was also called into question by many people who said that populism wasn't just a phenomenon of Trump, but also of Brexit and Britain and elsewhere. So, yeah, it's under threat, but it's not over. I mean, we still do have an international trading system, though it remains to be seen how well that will survive. We also have a degree of stability in the international monetary system. So it's not over, but being shaken a bit.
And Professor, I'll ask you about Brexit in just a second. Given that you coined the term soft power, how has Trump's first year in power affected America's soft power around the world?
Well, soft power is the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment. And if you look at the public opinion polls, you'll see that attraction of the United States has gone down around the whole world. President Trump has been very bad for American soft power. What's more, his budget, which he calls a hard power budget, or budget director Mick Mulvaney calls it that, cuts about a third of the resources that were scheduled for soft power issues in the State Department and USAID and so forth. So it's not surprising that American soft power, as measured by polls, is down.
And on the issue of standing in the world, Professor, you're probably aware that UK Prime Minister Theresa May, as we speak, is shaking up her cabinet. The main positions of state remain in the Big Four's names. But given that Brexit is a process that's ongoing, how is that affecting the UK's standing across the world?
Well, I think Brexit is not good for Britain's standing. Britain had a position as sort of a connector between Europe and the United States. Britain also had a position of being a very important part of what was happening inside Europe. And going through a divorce instead of that has hurt Britain. How well it will recover or not remains to be seen about the terms of the divorce.
It comes as French President Emmanuel Macron is in China, and you recently wrote a piece in Project Syndicate where you sort of postulated what's the best defense of China's use of soft power programs as sharp power tools. What's the answer to that?
Well, sharp power is the term, is a new term, but for an old idea, which is information warfare. Soft power depends on attraction. Sharp power can be coercive and competitive. I think the democracies have to use publicity and exposure when you find a soft power program, for example, China's Confucius Institutes, which is being twisted for propaganda purposes by, for example, excluding discussion of the Dalai Lama or of Taiwan and so forth. I think you have to make that public. You have to say anything that infringes on academic freedom, that's no longer soft power. That is a form of information warfare, and we won't accept it.
Professor, we're preparing for plenty of elections this year around the world, not least of which are the US midterm elections. I'd love to get your thoughts on whether the pendulum will swing back or at least a different way. And then, if you would as well, there's a lot of chatter right now about Oprah Winfrey perhaps running for president next time after last night's performance. Do you see that happening?
I doubt that Oprah is going to run for president, but the question of whether you will see a swing back to, in the 2018 election, it's quite plausible. There's a pattern of the out party having a recovery of sorts in the aftermath of a presidential election. And that, I think, is accentuated by the reaction against President Trump. He's appealed to his base, which is about 35% of the American public. That's not enough to get the kind of control that you need. So it's plausible that the House might swing back toward the Democrats in November of 2018.
All right, we have to leave it there. Unfortunately, our thanks to Professor Joseph Nye of Harvard, of course, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the U.S. National Intelligence Council, and also author of Is the American Century Over?